Hi everyone, it's me Maria THEA Angelica Agbay, a BSED science student, and today we're going to be discussing about lesson 2, which is about culture, the meaning, characteristics, and its function. So first, let's start up by defining culture. Let us answer the question, what is culture? Now, what is then a culture? So the customs, traditions, attitudes, values, norms, ideas, and even symbols govern human behavior pattern. Culture, therefore, is a moral, intellectual, and spiritual discipline for advancement in accordance with the norms and values based on accumulated heritage. It is imbibing and making our own the lifestyle and social pattern of the group one belongs to. Culture is also defined as a system of learned behavior shared by and transmitted among the members of the group. Culture is a collective heritage learned by individuals and passed from one generation to another. The individual receives culture as a part of social heritage and in return may reshape the culture and introduce changes which then become part of the heritage of succeeding generations. Now, culture has been defined in several different ways and of several different people. So there is no consensus among sociologists and anthropologists regarding the definition of culture. One of the most comprehensive definitions of the term culture was provided by British anthropologist Edward Taylor. He defines culture as that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of a society. Another important definition of culture is according to Robert McVer. He defines culture as the expression of our nature in our modes of living and our thinking. It is the intercourse in our literature, in religion, in recreation, and enjoyment. Culture, according to E.A. Bell, is defined as the total of integrated learned behavior patterns which are characteristics of the members of a society and which are therefore not the result of biological inheritance. On the other hand, Robert BSED defined culture as the complex whole that consists of everything we think and do and have as the members of society. Culture is also defined by Anderson and Parker, where in the picture we can only see Mr. Anderson, as the total content of the physiosocial, biosocial, and psychosocial universe man has produced and the socially created mechanisms through which these social products operate. Mr. Mlynowski also defined culture in the simplest way as the handiwork of man and the medium of his ends. Now that we have defined culture in a number of ways, let's now go to the second part, which is about the characteristics of culture. We will be discussing 17 characteristics of culture. First characteristic of culture is that it is a learned behavior. Not all behavior is learned, but most of it are, like combing one's hair, standing in line, telling jokes, are all constitute behaviors which had to be learned. Sometimes, the terms conscious learning and unconscious learning are used to distinguish the learning. For example, the ways in which a small child learns to handle a tyrannical father or a rejecting mother often affects the way in which that child, 10 or 15 years later, handles his relationship with other people. Some behavior are also obvious. Next characteristic is that culture is abstract. Culture exists in the minds or habits of the members of society. Culture is the shared ways of doing and thinking. There are degrees of visibility of cultural behavior, ranging from the regularized activities of persons to the internal reasons for doing so. In other words, We cannot see culture as such, we can only see human behavior. This behavior occurs in regular, patterned fashion, and it is called culture. The third characteristic is that culture is a pattern of learned behavior. The definition of culture indicated that the learned behavior of people is patterned. Each person's behavior often depends upon some particular behavior of someone else. The point is that, as a general rule, behaviors are somewhat integrated or organized with related behaviors of the other persons. The fourth characteristic of culture tells us that it is the products of behavior. Cultural learnings are the products of behavior because as the person behaves, there occur changes in him. The experience of other people are impressed as one as he grows up, and also many of his traits and abilities have grown out of his past behaviors. The next characteristic is that culture includes attitudes, values, and knowledge. There is a widespread error in the thinking of many people who tend to regard the ideas, attitudes, and notions which they have as their own. It is easy to overestimate the uniqueness of one's own attitudes and ideas. When there is agreement with the other people, it is largely unnoticed. But when there is disagreement or difference, one is usually conscious of it. Your differences, however, may also be cultural in several different reasons. The sixth characteristic implies that culture also includes material objects. Man's behavior resulted in creating objects. Men were behaving when they made these things. To make these objects required numerous and various skills which human being gradually built up through the ages. Man has invented something else, and so on. Occasionally, one encounters the view of man that does not make steel or battleship. All these things first existed in a state nature. Culture is shared by members of society. The patterns of learned behavior and the results of behavior are possessed not by one or a few persons, but usually by a large proportion. Thus, many millions of persons share such behavior patterns, such as Christianity, the use of automobiles, or even the use of English language. Persons may share some part of a culture unequally. Sometimes, the people share different aspects of culture too. The eighth characteristic implies that culture is superorganic. Culture is sometimes called superorganic as it implies that culture is somehow superior to nature. The word superior organic is useful when it implies that what may be quite a different phenomenon from a cultural point of view. For example, a tree means different things to a botanist who studies it. It may also mean different to the old woman who uses it for shade in the late summer afternoon. For the farmer who picks its fruit, the motorist who collides with it, and the young lovers who carved their initial in its trunk. The same physical objects and physical characteristics, in other words, may constitute to a variety of quite different cultural objects and cultural characteristics. The ninth characteristic of culture is that culture is pervasive. Culture is pervasive because it touches every aspect of life. The pervasiveness of culture is manifested in two different ways. First, culture provides an unquestioned context within which individual action and response take place. Not only emotional action, but relational actions are governed by cultural norms. Second, culture pervades social activities and institutions. According to Ruth Benedict, a culture, like an individual, is more or less consistent pattern of thought and action. With each culture, there comes into being characteristic, purposes, and not only shared by other types of society. In obedience to these purposes, each person further consolidates its experience, and in proportion to the urgency of these, drives the heterogeneous items of behavior, take more and more congruous shape. The 10th characteristic tells us that culture is a way of life. Culture simply means the way of life of a people or the design for living. Lockhart and Kelly defined it in his sense that a culture is a historically derived system of explicit and implicit designs for living, which tend to be shared by all or specially designed members of a group. The next characteristic is about culture is a human product. Culture is not a force operating by itself, and it is an independent of human actors. There is an unconscious tendency to defy culture, to endow it with life, and treat it as a thing. Culture is a creation of society in interaction and depends for its existence upon the continuance of society. In a strict sense, therefore, culture does not do anything on its own. It does not cause the individual to act in a particular way, nor does it make the normal individual into a maladjusted one. Culture, in short, is a human product. It is not independently endowed with life. The next characteristic is about culture is idealistic. Culture embodies the ideas and norms of a group. It is sum total of the ideal patterns and norms of behavior of a group. It consists of intellectual, artistic, and social ideas and institutions which the members of the society profess and to which they strive to conform. Culture is transmitted in members of society. The cultural ways are learned by persons from persons. Many of them are handed down by one's elders, by parents, teachers, and others. Other cultural behaviors are handed up to elders. Some of the transmission of cultures is among contemporaries. For example, the styles of dress, political views, and the use of recent labor-saving devices. One does not acquire a behavior pattern spontaneously. He learns it. That means that someone teaches him and he learns. Much of the learning process, both for the teacher and the learner, is quite unconscious, unintentional, or accidental. Next characteristic is that culture is continually changing. There is one fundamental and inescapable attribute of culture, the fact of unending change. Some societies at some times change slowly, and hence, in comparison to other societies, seem not to be changing at all. But they are changing, even though not obviously so. Another characteristic is that culture is variable. Culture varies from society to society, from group to group. Further, culture varies from group to group within the same society. There are subcultures within a culture. Cluster of patterns which are both related to general culture of the society and yet distinguishable from are called subcultures. The 16th characteristic of culture is that it is an integrated system. Culture possesses an order and system. Its various parts are integrated with each other, and any new element which is introduced is also integrated. The last characteristic of culture is that language is the chief vehicle of culture. Man lives not only in the present but also in the past and future. He is able to do this because he possesses language which transmits to him what was learned in the past and enables him to transmit their accumulated wisdom to the next generation. A specialized language pattern serves as a common bond to the members of a particular group or subculture. Although culture is transmitted in a variety of ways, language is one of the most important vehicles for perpetuating cultural patterns. Now to conclude, culture is everything which is socially learned and shared by the members of the society. It is culture that in the wide focus of the world distinguishes individual from individual, group from group, and society. Now that we are done defining all the characteristics of a culture, let's now proceed to the third part, which is about functions of culture. We will be discussing 4 functions of culture in the following slides. The first function of culture is that culture defines situations. Each culture has a subtle cues which define each situation. It reveals whether one should prefer to fight, run, laugh, or make love. For example, suppose someone approaches you with the right hand outstretched at waist level. What does this mean? That he wishes to shake hands in a friendly greeting is perfectly obvious. Obvious only that is to anyone familiar with the culture. But if not, some people may interpret it differently. Another characteristic is that culture defines attitudes, values, and goals. Attitude are tendencies to feel and act in a certain ways. Values are measures of goodness or desirability, and culture determines the goals of life. Each person learns in his culture what is good, true, and beautiful. Attitudes, values, and goals are defined by the culture, while the individual normally learns them as unconsciously as he learns the language. For example, we value private property, government, and many other things and experience. Goals, on the other hand, are those attainments which our values define as worthy. Example, winning a race, gaining the affections of a particular boy or girl, or becoming president of the firm. By approving certain goals and ridiculing others, the culture channels individuals' ambitions. The third function of culture is that culture defines myths, legends, and the supernatural. Myths and legends are an important part of every culture. They may inspire, reinforce effort, and sacrifice and bring comfort in bereavement. Whether they are true is sociologically unimportant. Ghosts are real to people who believe in them and who act upon this belief. We cannot understand the behavior of any group without knowing something of the myths, legends, and supernatural beliefs they hold. Myths and legends are powerful forces in a group's behavior. One of which that is very highly seen is about the Filipino culture, which these myths and legends are very popular. The next characteristic is that culture provides behavior patterns. The culture maps out the path to matrimony. The individual does not have to wonder how one secures a mate. He knows the procedure defined by his culture. Like for example, the individual need to go through painful trial and error learning to know what foods can be eaten without poisoning himself, or how to live among people without fear. He finds a ready-made set of patterns awaiting him, which he needs only to learn and follow. Now we have arrived to the last part of our discussion, which is about culture and society, talking about their relationship. It is said that no culture can exist except as it is embodied in a society of man. No society can operate without cultural directives. They are interdependent and interacting, yet express different aspects of the human situation. A society is always made of persons and their groupings. People carry and transmit culture, but they are not culture. Like matter and energy, like mind and body. One must also keep in mind that the interdependence and the reciprocal relationship between culture and society, each is distinguished concept in which the patterning and organization of the whole is more important than any of the component parts. And that is all for our lesson today. Thank you all for listening, and if you have any question, drop them down the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow for more videos like this. Bye!